Hoki ni stod na kok ikas kiniwa. I naksiks kenau saukitapia. And you said uchtu tsitapi. As I tell some audiences, I was just speaking to you in Mongolian. I'm very honored to be in your presence and to talk about Iniwa, the buffalo, and what's been happening over the past few years in our efforts regarding buffalo restoration. But I also want to thank you for coming out on such a day like today, when we should all be staying home, for coming to speak about something very important to this territory and to issues such as environment. As you know, and some of you, for instance, may have heard on the news a discovery down in Mexico where they uncovered people, in a cave that was there, through, tests and so on. They determined these people had been there for over 30,000 years. And there's other studies that show that humans have been in the Americas up to 70,000 years, way before the standard or the measuring stick that we use, the Clovis culture or the Folsom points and so on, which only go back to about 18,000 years, and which coincides basically or just after the last ice age. And it feels like an ice age today. During all that time, we could say that, and let me put it this way, every culture, every society, at one time or another, claim a territory. Okay. And based on the relationship that humans have with the territory, a culture arises out of that. In other words, the surrounding environment and so on influences your culture, your worldview, and so on. And in this case, the buffalo was one of those keystone species that was very much a part of the environment. And through the relationship between humans and the buffalo, a culture arises. And so the buffalo becomes a very important animal, a very important brother, in fact, with regard to Blackfoot Indians and other Plains Indians. So our brother, the buffalo, has been around for thousands of years, and the relationship between the humans, in this case, Plains Indians, Blackfoot, and the buffalo has been in existence for thousands of years. Now, as I was just mentioning outside the room to the news media, if you can imagine a situation where, let's say, I say to a group of people, I'm a Christian, and I have, and I follow all the beliefs and, prescriptions and circumscriptions of Christianity. But I've come to a place where I see no signs of it. I see no crosses out there that symbolizes, Christianity. I see no churches, soma, out there. I could still have all the beliefs, but there's no external icons that symbolizes that connection about what I carry around as beliefs and what's out there. So, keeping that in mind as an analogy, about 8-9 years ago, one of our graduate students at the University of Lethbridge studying environmental science brought a small group of Blood Indian elders, and she invited us out to the gathering. And in discussions with the elders talking about health, well-being, culture, the elders began to talk about the buffalo. And in their mind, they basically said, out of sight, out of mind. In other words, we're so closely related to that buffalo. Our stories, our sacred societies, and so on are so closely related. But we don't see that buffalo out there. It's like I don't see any crosses out there. We don't see that buffalo. That's what they meant by out of sight, out of mind. They said, our youth, we teach them our ceremonies, we teach them our songs, we teach them our stories. But they don't see that buffalo out there. They're not making the connections. So we'd sure like to see, it was a dream back in 2008 or so. It was a dream on the part of the elders that they would like to see free roaming buffalo again. And some of the stories that came out, for instance, basically they were saying, we know that the spirit of the buffalo has never left us. It's still here. So one of the stories they shared with us and that we've shared with others is, you know, that Highway 509 that goes towards Standoff and so on. The Blood Indians nicknamed the highway Bingo Road because everybody comes in to the casino and so on. Well, when they were surveying the road, one day the surveyor was looking through his scope and so on, and all of a sudden he would step aside and look around. And finally, he told his assistant, come over here, look through this scope and tell me what you see. So his assistant did the same thing, looked through the scope, step aside, look around. He asked him, what do you see when you look through the scope? And he says, I see thousands of buffalo out on the plains. So when you hear those kind of stories, and here in this case, they weren't Indian surveyors, they were white surveyors that were seeing those spirits of the buffalo out there. They conclude this, you know, the buffalo has never left us. Out of that small meeting with elders back in 2008, we started to hold what we call buffalo dialogues. And they were just open invitations, just like SACPA, you know, open invitation. Whoever is interested can come and join the conversation in these buffalo dialogues. The only difference was we always left an empty seat at the table for the buffalo. And without going into long explanations about how it happens, the buffalo would ask us some loaded questions. Things like, hey, I've been gone for over 100 years. You guys have done without me for all those years. Why do you want me to come back? If I do come back, is it going to be just the same old? Or what do you plan to do? In other words, it's kind of like a relative that has left you. And you ask the relative to come back. And he says, why do you want me to come back? You know? What is there for me? So we held these dialogues in Blackfoot territory, crossed the border into the Blackfeet Reservation, all the way up to Siksika, Blackfoot. I don't know, I lost count of how many dialogues we had. Well, it was as though these elders that were participating in the dialogues were testing the younger people, how committed they were with regard to buffalo restoration. So that in the fall of 2013, they finally came out and they said, okay, we've talked about the buffalo for a number of years now. I think we need to do something. I think we all agree. We are all of one mind with regard to bringing our brother back. But they said, it's a big job. It's not something you can do overnight. It's not an issue of simply taking buffalo, dropping them in the field, and so on. We need help. And incidentally, when we were having these dialogues, we felt very alone. We felt, we've got a big uphill, fight and so on with regard to buffalo restoration. But we soon found out that, hey, there's a whole bunch of other people out there thinking the same way. We ended up partnering with Wildlife Conservancy Society, who in fact has a buffalo program. Out of Wildlife Conservancy Society, a new organization came into existence, American Bison Society. The American Prairie Reserve over here in Montana, for instance, are into buying lands back that farmers want to sell, and they're stocking the place, the American Prairie Reserve, with bison. World Wildlife Fund. And here in Alberta, we have Bison Belong out of Banff, Alberta. And in that process, we also discovered that both national parks, Waterton and Banff, had somewheres hidden, but deep in their files, a buffalo restoration program that they've been toying around with. Every once in a while, they look at it, put it away, So when we found out about these other NGOs, we decided to contact them, and we started working with all these other organizations, so that now, hey, we have relatives all over the place. In fact, we can say globally with regard to buffalo restoration. Well, in the fall of 2013, the elders said, we need partners. We can't do it by ourselves. And so they said, the first group of people we need to contact is our neighbors, the First Nations. Let's see if we can partner with them. And that's where the idea of a Buffalo Treaty came into existence. So that in the fall of 2014, the day, on September the 23rd, September 22nd is the anniversary of Treaty Number 7, and it was on September the 23rd, 2014, that 4 American First Nations, Fort Peck Indian Reservation in eastern Montana, Fort Belknap by Havre, Montana, the Blackfeet just across the border, and over the mountains, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, sometimes referred to as Flatheads. And on the Canadian side, the Blood Tribe, Piikani, Piegan, Tsuut'ina or Sarsi, and Siksika. 8 First Nations got together to sign the treaty. And then afterwards, since then, we've had other First Nations in Saskatchewan, Hobbema, the Stonies, the Three Nakota bands at Stony have all signed on to the treaty. We've had our brothers and sisters from Central and South America at a gathering of the Eagle and the Condor in New York also have signed the treaty, in support of buffalo restoration. Just incidentally, so that you're familiar with the notion of the eagle and the condor, there's prophecies about the eagle and the condor coming back together. The condor symbolizing the people of the South, and the eagle symbolizing the people of the North. So there's been these ongoing discussions of elders and other leaders in different places in South and North America. And it was at one of those meetings back in 2016 that at an Eagle and Condor meeting that our Southern brothers and sisters also signed on to the treaty. So, what is the treaty about? The treaty, as you know, only sovereign nations can sign treaties. Well, our people have signed many treaties long before the newcomers came. So treaty number 7 is really just another treaty with another sovereign. So, but we've had many treaties and so on signed with different nations throughout North America. And it was on the signing of that treaty where the signatories agreed to a number of things contained in the treaty, and you've got copies of the treaty on your table. The idea behind the treaty is really to have the signatories to the treaty to work together on a number of issues. And those issues include conservation, culture, education, health. It's much healthier to eat buffalo. Okay? And, research. Economics comes into the picture. And incidentally, we're going to be having our next treaty anniversary in May over on the Flathead country. And because Ted Turner is the largest buffalo owner, has the largest buffalo ranch, the largest land owner in the United States. In fact, has requested to come and meet with the treaty signatories. So we're going to be having Ted Turner as our guest at the next meeting in May. The treaty speaks to, like I said, these different articles, and you can go through them. I don't want to go through talking about each and every one of them, but the important thing about, and a question that can be asked with regard to the impact of the treaty. Well, one of the things that has come out of the treaty is that some of you may have heard about Yellowstone buffalo, Yellowstone National Park in Montana and Wyoming. And the Yellowstone buffalo have had a very bad rap, mainly by RCAF and other organizations, blaming the buffalo for certain, spread of diseases, brucellosis, TB, and so on. Well, it's true, the buffalo did catch those diseases, but it's being blamed for its spread. When in reality, nobody ever says anything about the deer. Nobody ever says anything about the elk. And they're free roaming. And in fact, it's those animals, like deer and elk, that spread those type of diseases that are common to bovine type of animals. So one of the things out of the Buffalo Treaty was to work with Yellowstone National Park on a quarantine program, so that whenever the, once the buffalo come out of those quarantine, they're disease-free. The Badger Two Medicine area, just south of the park, close to the Blackfeet Reservation, we've worked with government on the American side, and we've managed to get it declared as a historical cultural area. And we have one more little hurdle to go jump over when the Blackfeet are going to be able to turn buffalo into the Badger Two Medicine area.